everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Smith, and you're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. Today, we're back to my more usual live and unscripted, which is working on an actual quilting project at my long arm machine. And today, we're going to be doing very contrasted to the quilt that's hanging behind me. We're going to be doing straight line quilting, which is generally quite a modern or contemporary feel. And honestly, the quilt I'm working on is a little bit that way too. So with this straight line quilting, today I want to show you how I load my quilt. Maybe even before that, how I chose my backing out of my stash, because this is a scrappy quilt from my stash too. So that's the whole theme. And then we'll get into the actual quilting part, and I have some great tips for you that I've learned over the years for doing straight line quilting and getting things to be square, getting the lines to line up with the seam lines, keeping there from being ripples as you move back and forth, all those sorts of things. So I've got some great tips for you in that way. So that's what's on tap for today. Let's take a minute to say hello to those that are tuning in, and then we'll get started. Cheryl, first-time viewer from Vinton, Iowa. Good morning. Hi, Cheryl. Bobbin with Brittany. Love the name. Happy I caught this one. Hello from Ashland, Ohio.
Love some apples.
Laurel, good morning from Apple Valley, California. That sounds delicious. And Judy, thanks Susan so much for the all-over feather and its variations. Same thread path, so many different looks. And Judy, I know what you're referring to. I taught a couple variations on the cruise and you were there. Angela in Athabasca, Alberta. Awesome. Angela, we've seen your name before, so welcome back. Nita, good morning, fellow quilters. We have parts of our grass starting to green up and bulbs popping up. How lovely is that? Spring's coming to the Colorado mountains. Laura Gray's music, planting veggies in the garden today. Now, Laura, I know you personally. You're in Texas, so you've got warm weather already. Jeannie in Missoula, Montana. And don't know your first name, but new to long arm quilting and have loved Susan's tutorials. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, that's good. So
I have a question, although we'll do it later.
Mr. Producer's talking to me here. Let me give you, in case you are a new viewer, just a quick little synopsis of what Live and Unscripted is all about. My kids kind of coined it, and it has stuck. They coined it Quilting's first reality show. I'm the only quilter that I know of that live streams quilting an actual project like as I do it. So there's no edits. There's no just giving you the pretty parts or cutting out the bits where the thread breaks or the needle breaks or something like that, right? It is real time. So what you'll be seeing today, I probably won't get a whole quilt finished, but what you do see is happening in actual time. That's how long things take. That's what I do when problems arise. This is how I arrive at my decisions. So it's not a lesson particularly. It's just me working on an actual project, often a client quilt, but today my own quilt, and just talking through what I'm doing, what decisions or choices I'm making, and why. And that I feel like just helps you, especially if you're a novice quilter. It helps you when you come to decisions, even if they're not the identical decisions, to know that there's more than one way to do things, and here's why you might do it this way, or here's why you might do it that way, and just to let you know that it's okay. And thread breaks happen to all of us. I promise you they do. No matter how long you've been quilting, they still happen. So that's what Live and Unscripted is about. Over the years, I've tried to do it twice a month. You know, that has flexed as I've had travel schedules, or my husband has a day job that he's got to work at, and he's Mr. Producer behind the scenes. So it's not always, it's not always consistent as to timing, but we do try and occasionally do this about twice a month. In the last couple of weeks, I've been coming live and sewing, not quilting, which is unusual for me, but I just had this urge to make a scrappy quilt, and I had a lot of scraps in my own bins, and so this is the quilt that I made with those scrappy strips. I tend to have a lot of strips. So if you want to know more about why I have strips like that or how I chose them and so forth, I did 3 live episodes on the sewing of this quilt. So they're linked in the description below this episode, and there's also a link to the free pattern, and I call it the Scrappy Strippy Chevron. So all you have to do is provide your email address and it'll be sent to you. You can download it and print it. Little side note, I am offering, for anyone who makes this quilt, I'm offering a chance to win free quilting of your project by me. What you have to do is get the pattern from me and then send us a picture showing that you've done some work sewing it. So definitely does not have to be complete, but has to be beyond a pile of fabric, right? Got to show that you're making this actual quilt. And we're hoping to do the draw by the end of March. So you've just got a few more days to send that in. Send a photo to support@StitchedBySusan.com. And then sometime over the course of this summer, you'll have some time to finish your quilt, and then I'll do free quilting for that. Let's see, what else? Let's talk about the quilt a little bit, and then a little bit about the backing. So on the last sewing episode, I kind of ran a poll. Do you prefer this backing or this backing? And we settled on one. But as so often happens, plans went awry. So let's start here. I'm going to flip this over the rails so that you can kind of get a glimpse of it and all its colors while I talk about these backing choices. If I go this way a little more, yeah, you can see a fair bit there. Mr. Producer adjusts the camera for you. Look at that. Okay, so number one, and I'll keep this short because I talked about this in more depth on the sewing episodes. You can always refer back to them. But I started by choosing this focus fabric that I love the colors of. And then when I went into my scrap bins, I kind of curated them to match these colors. And I was not necessarily trying to achieve the same ratio. So this has a ton of green. I wasn't necessarily going for that. But I was looking for, okay, there's a rusty color and a rose color, but there's no pure red. Or there's teal and there's aqua, but there's no royal blue, right? So that just helped me have a narrower range of colors. So then this quilt is my result from this inspiration. I don't feel like I necessarily am a genius at choosing fabrics that go together. So this is like some artist, in this case, Kay Fassett, already thought this out, right? And I've just taken his inspiration and run with it. So that's my quilt top. Now for backings, these are the two that we took a poll on in my last live show. This one actually appears in the quilt and is very like, if you will. This is the one that a number of the viewers and I finally chose because there is some of this color in the quilt, although not this specific fabric, because I didn't cut out of my yardage. I used scraps. But I liked the fact that this was a little bit different. It blended, but was a little bit darker. However, when I unfolded both of these, neither one of them had enough fabric. They're both somewhat directional, so I had to piece them long ways instead of cross ways, and I just didn't have enough of either of them. So back to my cupboard, I wasn't going to go buy fabric, and I seriously considered this one. It's kind of this sparkly orange, and it matches, but the last quilt I made of this chevron pattern has an orange backing. Not this exact one, but orange. And I thought, I just want to do something different. So here's what I decided to do. Hang on, got to go pick it up. I have in my stash a number of sheets, like 1970s and 80s sheets that I collect at garage sales and use for backings. And I found this one, which has my similar colors, has the green and gold. I hemmed and hawed, you guys, I'll be honest, because do I think it is a perfect backing? I don't know that I do. But my commitment with this quilt was to use up scraps and to use the things that I have. And I had enough of this in one piece. It doesn't even need any seaming. And so this is what I decided to use. But even from there, I had a couple decisions to make. One of them was, I intend to quilt parallel lines, but they're going to run the same direction as the seam lines in all my chevrons. What I did not want was for my backing stripes to run in the same direction, because my stitching will never be perfect to those stripes, right? Because I can't see them when I'm on the front of the quilt. So I want my stripes on the backing to go crossways, this direction. And doing it that way, then my quilt barely fit from top to bottom of this sheet. So I added this ugly fabric, which is just a leader, right? My actual sheet is big enough for the backing, but not big enough to attach at my long arm. So this is my way of extending it. And all I've done is, it's not even a seam that you press open. I've just literally lapped them over top of each other and basted the two of them together. And now I'll make sure my quilt ends inside that seam line, and that will just get trimmed off afterwards. And I actually keep these ugly pieces and I use them over and over again until the fabric starts getting stretched and misshapen. They're my leaders when I need extensions. Okay, I think that's all about the quilts. That's the whole backing saga. Let me get this stuff out of the way. And I have one more story for you guys. This is a personal one. For me, this week has been full of office work and catching up on things and uploading videos and all that sort of stuff, which is not always work that is super inspiring and that I love to get up to. So in between, I quilted 5. This is number 5 quilt this week. I've done 4 already because this is my solution to every problem. My machine is calling and I must sew. So I thought I would wear that for you today. Okay, let's get started on today's quilt. We'll move the quilt itself to the side. As always throughout these episodes, I intend for them to be interactive. So ask any questions you want to. I'll stop from time to time and Mr. Producer will put those questions on the screen and I'll answer them. Have conversations among yourselves. Give me any tips. I've learned a lot from you guys collectively over the years. So that's how we'll approach this. Let me move all the things. Showed you the pattern, right? Mentioned that there's a link in the description for that. Let's make sure we get this loaded correctly. It goes... Okay, I have to look at this to make sure I get it right. Yeah. Okay. My little extensions are actually going at the sides. The length of my quilt is going to run from side to side on my rails because that's the way I want my quilting lines to go. This is one of those situations where there's not one right way or only one way to do this. You get to make these decisions as you go. And I've decided which way I want my stripes to run on the quilt. And therefore that is going to determine which way I need to load my quilt. So my quilting lines, I want to be vertical on the quilt when it's finished. So I'm loading the quilt so that I can quilt them from side to side. And mind you, this being a sheet, the hemline is still on it. I have not worried about undoing that because again, it's excess fabric and it's going to get trimmed off. All that's important is that I keep that hemline straight as I load it on the long arm. And it is quite thick, so I'm going to make it extend a little bit above my red snapper. A word about using sheets while I'm snapping this on. Quilters have strong opinions about whether or not to use sheets as backings. Here's my theory. I would not recommend using a high quality Egyptian cotton 800 thread, count per inch sheet. That is far too fine of a weave and you will not be able to get beautiful stitches. You will have poor tension. That's much, much, much tighter of a weave than a quilting cotton is. However, older sheets or frankly less expensive sheets that have like 250 thread count per inch work beautifully. And so these sheets that I buy, like I said, at garage sales, for one thing, they've been used and they're soft. So they're definitely pre-washed, but also they just have that slightly looser weave that is more similar to quilting cotton. Now, if you're a purist, this may not be for you either because I don't think this sheet is 100% cotton. Pretty sure it's a polyester blend. And my quilt top is cotton and the gray fabric is a cotton and linen blend. So that whole quilt top, sorry about the wobble, that whole quilt top is going to have a little bit of shrinkage to it when I wash the quilt and the backing is not going to shrink. However, I love quilts that have crinkle and that does not bother me at all. So I'm okay with one part being pre-washed and one part not, and the whole thing when it gets washed and dried is going to shrink up a little bit and I'm fine with that. But just know that those are things you want to think about. So my little extenders that I've put on, I can see that my basting stitching is pulling, can you see this? Just a hair tighter than my sheet. So I'm going to pay attention to that as I'm rolling my backing on and you'll see me adjusting for that. For now, I'm just walking around my quilting frame, getting the whole excess of that backing pulled over the frame and draping down on the other side. And I'm going to grab my water spritzer because there are some creases in this backing and just give them a gentle little spritz and they will relax. No need to actually press it. Okay, we're just pausing for a jiffy and making a mic adjustment here. Bear with us for half a second. Let's see if that works better. Okay. So now I've got my backing spread over that far edge, pulled fairly straight, and now I'm going to start rolling it on. And I see that I've got a little crease here. I'm going to fix that right away. I didn't see that when I was snapping it on. There we go. So as I roll this, I'm just going to walk around and keep tugging this sheet straight and probably keep tugging on these seams a little bit to extend them just a touch. We'll see how it goes as the backing progresses as a whole. And if it does not go on fairly smoothly, I have an extra step you can take. This is critical for a quick load, that you be aware of any wrinkles or irregularities that are forming and straighten them out, because we can't just willy-nilly load a backing and hope that our quilt will come out square. It's important that our backing is flat if we want to have a square result. And I feel like these leaders maybe have reached their limit, because this seems quite extreme today. I'm having to stretch them out quite a bit to keep those wrinkles smoothed out. But I still have a trick or two up my sleeve, so bear with me. I have the advantage of knowing that that top edge of my sheet is quite straight also, because it's been hemmed. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage too. Now I think you guys can see on that overhead camera that this hemline is, can you see how it's pulling in from the sides? Short of undoing that hem, which I do not want to take the time to do, what I'm going to do today is literally just clip a couple places right through that seam. I don't need that length, right? And I'm going to attach my red snapper above it. But this is just going to stop it from pulling in those edges askew. And I've done this on fabric where the selvage really pulls in too. I've done the same thing. Just snip through it so that it can relax. Much better. One more at this end. Maybe even two. Much better. That lays a lot flatter already. I've just got to get that seam line pulled back over my snapper area. And again, I'm really counting on the fact that I'm confident this seam line is a straight line. So if I line that up with my red snapper, it's going to be straight. And then I will show you my last little trick to even out some of this fullness. Good, good, good. A little tug right there. We're good. And it doesn't matter that these funny little flaps hang off the end. I will just take care not to quilt them in. It was actually just last weekend. We were driving home from something else in Spokane where we live. And there's a particular lady that once or twice a year has these giant, I call it a garage sale, but really it's in her detached garage. It's a shop sale of all kinds of textile stuff. And so just last weekend I was replenishing my stock of these sheets. I do love them. Okay, here's my last little trick for you. Let's get this over so you can see the result. Here's what we've got right now. We've got these leaders on the end still pulling in a bit with a bit of looseness right here. So what I want to do now is distribute. This fabric is really stretchy, so if I put a little tension on that, I can distribute that better. And the way to do that is by literally rolling all the quilt up on the other roller and then rolling it all back while keeping a little bit of tension on the roller bars. So I'm going to do that now. I don't know how much of it you'll be able to see, other than you'll see the rollers going around. So I've got my ratchets turned off, and I'm just rolling this quilt and keeping a little bit of tension on it. And I know you see ripples in there, and when I roll it back to the beginning, I'm going to clean those up. And I might need Mr. Producer's help, or else I'll have to run back and forth many times. So again, this time I'm keeping tension on this roller as I pull it forward onto the front one. And as that happens, it's going to stretch out these little side edges a bit and take up that excess. It's a bit of a process, but it's really, really effective. This works too if you have a backing that's got multiple seams in it and it's not laying really flat the first time you load it. Doing this back and forthing a little bit. I've seen quilters do it 2 or 3 times. I think once is going to be enough today. But it just helps to put a little bit of tension on the whole thing and distribute any unevenness. My mother was a hand quilter from way back, and her method of prepping a quilt for quilting was to put it on a big sort of living room sized frame. And because it was, this was before the days of rotary cutters and rulers and cutting mats, because it was not squared up, there was always this not quite perfectness of it. And she managed that by simply putting tension on the whole thing, right? And all that slight unevenness, if there was any in the backing, or indeed in the quilt itself, was distributed so that the quilt looked flat when it was finished and square. And so I'm just using that same philosophy to stretch my fabric just a little. And little is the key word. And now you can still see perhaps a little bit of the pulling here, but when I put that side clamp on, that evens right out. So that's going to be a-okay. All right, let's get on with it. Well, Mr. Producer says there's some questions. So let me lay the batting on, and while I smooth it, we'll take questions. This is 100% bamboo batting. You've heard me talk about it before. It's from Winline. It's their 6-ounce bamboo batting. It is so luxurious and soft. This is my favorite choice for my own quilts. And this is indeed my quilt. So that's what it's getting. Okay, questions?
Yes, go on the camera. This is a 3-part.
Okay, 3-part question. Part 1. Having a real struggle lining up the blocks to sew together. Tried overlapping the points by 1/4 inch, but it still doesn't work out right. I feel like I have to mess around with each piece. Okay. By blocks, I mean sewing together the chevrons on the bias. Okay. There's a 3rd part. Okay, here's an answer. When you finish the top, baste all the way around it before you put it on the long arm. Okay, that's a good tip too. Talking about how far to overlap the points on the chevrons. I think, Susan, that your best answer is going to be number 1, go back to, I think it was the live episode 2 where I was sewing those and showing it. Maybe episode 3 when I was sewing the long strips together, possibly. And then also refer to the blog posts that we've been releasing while I've been doing this too, because it was from a different quilt, right? So there's just a different perspective, different fabrics, different colors, and possibly me showing it with a camera view as opposed to a video camera type view, and see if that will help. I just know that for mine, when I was putting the striped chevron, where's my quilt? Hang on a sec. when I'm initially sewing the stripes to the solid and the solid to the stripes, I overlap those seams by 1/4 inch so that my stitching line is where they intersected, right? This intersection was at the 1/4 inch line, not the point or the edge of the fabric, but right on the seam allowance or where I was going to stitch. That's where they intersected. And then when I go to sew the rows together, they actually nest. I pressed everything toward the gray, toward the solid, the background fabric. And then when I went to sew the long rows together, those seams nested together perfectly. I hope that helps a little bit. I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, we've got our batting laid on.
We're not done questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're not done questions. I apologize. Helen, where did you get your shirt? Love it. I got it at a vendor at our local quilt show, and I can't off the top of my head remember their name. I'm sorry. I'm no help. How much space is between your long arm and the wall? About 2 feet. And mine is only sitting this way because I do so much work on camera. People tend not to stand in this little space behind, but to stand on the room side. But this is what works for me. Diane, I remember in your last live you said you'd be teaching in Texas. Where? I'm teaching at Stitch House in Richardson, Texas, which is just outside Dallas, and it's in June. I think it's 19 and 20. Link in the comments, Mr. Producer said. Teresa's asking, does your leader ever stretch? I have not had my leaders ever stretch, Teresa. Now, I don't... Yeah, you mean the fabric, the canvas that's on...
The add-on ones.
Oh, do you mean the fabric that I sewed on? If that's what you mean, then yes. I can only get away with using them 2 or 3 times, and then they're not like flat anymore. The edge is real rippled. Depends on the fabric type too. So I only reuse them a couple times till they start looking misshapen, and then out they go and I get new ones. Love the back and forth rolling. Yeah, it really helps. And I learned that from another quilter years ago. She gave me that tip, and she would do it with extreme wonky backings. Like when you get 108-inch wide backings that are sometimes so twisted, it helps for that. And you can do it multiple times and try to ease out that wonkiness. Betsy, show the back of the quilt and the seams. Sure will, Betsy. I was just thinking that too before I go further.
That's what I did.
Susan, that's what I did, but the sides don't line up after seaming. So do you mean after putting the pieces together, then these seams don't line up? In which case, did you follow my graph and have the right ones, like the 6-inch ones match the 6, the 8 match the 8, etc.? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm getting to the bottom of your trouble. I just know that it worked for me. That's all I know. Okay, more questions?
I think that's it.
Okay, let's look at the back because this is a little point of interest. Here's the back of my quilt. Either one shows. Can you see that? So these seams here are where I joined the stripes to the background fabric. And in those cases, in all of them, I pressed toward the solid, toward the background fabric because it lays flatter. Then when I went to sew the long vertical seams together, I pressed them open. Can you see that? Now, you certainly don't have to. I've done this quilt before where I pressed them to one side. But knowing that I was going to quilt it with these lines that extend the same direction as those long seams, I decided to press them open to keep that bulkiness down as much as possible. So that's a choice you can make. Absolutely, and that's what I chose for mine. So that's what the back looks like. Here we go. So you can see that I'm putting the length of the quilt crosswise on my long arm rails so that my horizontal lines, when all is said and done, or my parallel lines, are going to run from top to bottom of the quilt. Now I'm quilting today on a Bernina Q24. Her name is Stella. And as I go, I'll be talking about some of the features she has that enable me to do this straight line quilting easily. But let me go ahead and get this basted first, and then we'll take a close-up view, and I'll show you some thoughts on that. So I'm simply going to baste this perimeter edge that is currently exposed. I like 1/4 inch basting stitches. You can baste with longer ones if you want to. You can baste with your regular quilting stitch. It doesn't matter, really. All of this is going to be hidden inside the seam allowance when I put the binding on. So you don't have to be really particular about what it looks like. I just quite like the 1/4 inch basting stitches. So what this is doing is securing the shape of my quilt, and I'm doing it with care because there are a ton of bias edges in this quilt. It is possible to stretch it out of shape even if it's flat, and it's possible if it's not quite flat to get it into shape. So I find that this upper edge wants to stretch out a little and push out in front of my needle. So I'm going slowly and taking time to coax it under the needle. I need to control that edge so it does not push out in front of me. Sometimes that means using my fingers as I'm doing now to push it under. Sometimes it means pulling what I've already stitched just a little touch. Sometimes just putting some weight on the side that I've already stitched is enough. I happen to have my belts engaged, which we'll talk about more in a moment, so that I know that I'm getting a perfectly straight horizontal line of stitching. So I don't have to think about that one. I've just got to think about my quilt not being stretched at all from side to side. Beautiful. So what I've done is go up the left side, across the top, and down the right side. You may have seen other quilters recommending things like start in the middle and work out to each edge, or start at the front closest to you and baste toward the top. None of those are wrong. I've basted enough quilts. I'm confident enough in my ability to keep it on here square that it's more efficient to just go 1, 2, 3 around the whole thing, and that's how I choose to baste. But whichever way you do it, you need to get all 3 of those sides secure, no matter what order you do it in. And then I'm going to put my side clamps on and my front magnetic bars, and then we're going to stand and talk just a little bit about how I do straight line quilting and how you might be able to accomplish this same thing at your machine, which may not have the same features as mine. These little side clamps, they're called E-edge clamps. Yeah, you can see me a little bit there. They're by the Red Snapper people, part of the same system. I love them. I love that they grip this long area and keep a nice tension across my whole quilting space. And then I use these simple magnetic bars, and I'm gonna put a little disclaimer in here. One of my students posted a picture this week of an enormous wound on her finger because she got it pinched between 2 of these clamps. So it's kind of like the McDonald's cups. May be hot. These may stick together like clamps. The way I keep mine, you see me grabbing down. Let me move Stella a little bit. You see me reaching down onto the floor. They're literally at the juncture of wall and floor. I have a fatigue mat down here, and I just rest those magnets end to end in that crevice of wall and floor so that they never have an opportunity to overlap each other or catch. And that has worked for me. And when I pick them off my machine, I can just stick my fingers under them and pull. And I just don't ever get them where they can snap to each other because they are strong. There's no doubt about it. Okay. Let's talk a smidge about machine and feet and tools here. A couple things. Okay, close-up look, if you will, Dave. Coming up. There we are. Okay. So This is probably a more typical quilting foot. This is called a darning foot, or sometimes you'll see an open toe, kind of a C-shaped foot, not as much of an O. And it's a hopper foot, which you need at the long arm or even at your domestic machine to be free motion quilting. This is what I often use to quilt. What I have loaded right now is actually a ruler foot. And what makes it a ruler foot is this 1/4 inch profile, right? So that a ruler, this is not a quilting ruler, but it does have a thick edge. But you want that thick edge of a ruler to have a barrier, right? What's also handy about this foot is
Shouldn't be.
they have to be. All I'm getting is a red light.
Batteries.
Hmm?
There's not much in these either.
Okay, can you put me on the main screen so I can talk for a minute while you go?
I don't know where they lost you. Here you
Two
talk.
shakes. Checking, checking.
Yeah.
Check, check. Okay, we have sound again.
Yeah.
Okay, put me on the main screen if you would. Okay, Mr. Producer's going to go get me a fresh set of batteries. These are partially used ones that we traded out. While he does that, this is a little bit of a technical conversation, but I want to be clear because probably you're not quilting on exactly the same machine as I am, right? So long arm machines, some of them have added features that help you to create a perfectly straight horizontal quilting line, or sometimes a vertical one, but today's case I'm using horizontal. So on my Gamble machines, it had a magnetic channel lock, they called it, which simply meant that a magnet snapped onto my one rail, making my machine resist moving back and forth, but move freely side to side, right? And by resist, I mean it pretty much wouldn't. So therefore, I could just guide my machine from left to right and right to left, and it would stay in a perfectly straight line. On my current machine, which is the Bernina Q24, I do have their Qmatic or computer-driven system, which means I have an X and a Y belt, right? Which I can connect my machine to. It's got a little, I can clip it onto the belt. And now that belt drives my machine or resists movement for my machine. So those two systems are the most common, either magnetic things that keep you in a channel, a straight line, or belt-driven things in some way that keep you in a straight line. However, quite a few machines don't have either, or it's an expensive add-on feature. So here's what I want to encourage. I know because I've talked to a number of my students that you have figured out ways with clamps you can put over your wheels or clamps you can put on the rails to jerry-rig, frankly, some type of locking mechanism so you can get lovely straight lines. So I encourage you, start conversations in the comments, and we won't put all of these on the screen, but feel free to talk among yourselves and ask, hey, I drive a XYZ brand of machine. Anyone else out here have any tips for how I could quilt these straight lines so that you can do this kind of quilting too? So that said, I'm going to get started quilting. I'm using, oh, we're going to change out batteries one more time into a totally fresh one so we don't have that problem again. With luck. We'll be quiet again for a second. should be good to go. Get attached again. Okay, I've mentioned my machine, I've mentioned my belts. The last thing I think would be the thread that I'm using, and we could have the bigger camera for a minute, Dave. I am using Isacord 100% poly 40 weight thread today, and my thread color is 0131, which the number won't matter a ton to you, but it's similar to my background fabric, maybe a shade or two darker, but it blends nicely with all of the fabrics on the quilt. And I have the same thing loaded in my bobbin for ease. So what I've got going now, because I was talking about my belts, right? I've disengaged the one that holds it from side to side. So see how easy Stella moves from side to side now? But when I push, Stella does not move from front to back. Now I can override that to reposition for my next line. It just requires a bit more force. But in general, when I'm guiding her from side to side, she's going to stay in a beautiful straight line, enabling me to get those lovely parallel lines. You've probably heard me say this before. I am so fond of parallel line quilting. Whenever I've got a quilt that I don't know what to quilt on, like I don't want to interfere with some story that the quilt is telling. I don't know if you remember my K-Facet bowls and vases quilt from a year or so ago. Like, what do I quilt on this that does not detract? And also it's not really visible in the busy prints. I love straight lines for being a complementary foil to almost anything. So in the case of this quilt, it is kind of a modern or contemporary design, but I've also used straight lines on very traditional quilts with really good success. I am super fond of straight line quilting. Okay, I've locked my thread and we're starting on the first line. I typically do sew a little faster than this, but it gets loud on the microphone, so we're going to keep the pace down today. Mr. Producer is looking at me with a question mark. What's up?
Oh, I got a lot of movement on that camera.
That's because my left hand is not on the...
No, even with your hand on it. Like really bad.
We're going to try a line or two more. Mr. Producer's saying we're getting a lot of movement, so we'll see if we can make adjustments for that. I mentioned that I'm going to use my ruler for the first few lines to reposition for my next line. And what I will sometimes do too, I don't have my blue painter's tape here, can you imagine? Sometimes I will wrap a piece of blue painter's tape around my ruler so that I don't have to figure out which line it is each time either. But in this case, I'm only going to use the ruler a couple times and then I'm going to eyeball it. And so we don't have to worry about that too much. I'm just slowing down that little coasting speed. It does not need to coast at that kind of a rate. Actually, we could do this. There we go. Okay. Just making a few adjustments to my machine. So one of the pluses of this quilt, oh, we got to skip in stitches. Okay, let me talk about one of the pluses first while I rewind, because it is a reality show. One of the pluses of this quilt is that there are so many straight lines in the piecing, particularly my long vertical seams, right, which this one is. It's a vertical seam in the finished quilt. I am going to use those seam lines through this whole quilting process to zhuzh, to use my favorite word, my quilt. So every time I advance the quilt, I will be heavily focused on making sure those seam lines get straightened out. And remember, we have a lot of bias edges in this quilt, so I have the freedom of making these tiny adjustments and making the seam line fall exactly where it is straight with the stitching. So we have come to a thing that we should talk about because it's a white elephant in the room, or at least an elephant in the room. It's maybe not white. The elephant in the room is a lot of long arm machines do not like stitching from right to left. There's a lot of factors that are at play. The timing of the hook mechanism, the ply of the thread, the twist of the thread, all kinds of things can come into play. And by and large, my machine, Stella, is very good about stitching both ways. I love these horizontal lines, right? But there are days, and it looks like today is going to be one of them, where she doesn't want to. So here's how I approach it. And we'll see how far we get with the quilting today, because I'm not going to keep you here through pain, but I'm going to keep you here through a few adjustments. What I try and do is think of the factors that are bringing to bear here and see if I can adjust any of them and see if I can get her happier with stitching both ways. So I'll do things like put in a fresh needle. Well, it so happens that I had put in a fresh one just before this quilt began, so I know it's not that. But I will try rethreading, because sometimes that's all it takes. I will probably try putting in a different bobbin, because sometimes that can be an infinitesimal change too, and will just be enough, right, to make that stitching happen. So I'll try a few of these things. I might even try raising and lowering my hopper foot pressure a little bit. Sometimes that can make a difference. If you're working on a machine that has, like Gamels have, for example, your take-up roller gets fat as the quilt rolls around it, and you literally raise that bar. So raising and lowering that, like that actually makes a difference in the height of your quilting surface, and that makes a difference in how the stitches form and how smoothly they form. So anything that you can think of on your machine that is a factor in how the stitches form, try tweaking them one at a time. I've heard quilters say, and I don't agree with this statement, quilting machines aren't meant to stitch from right to left. I disagree. They are meant to, but it's finicky. Like, all the factors have to be pretty precise for it to work well. But if you have the patience to work through those factors, often you can work through that problem and come out the other side. So I have had days, I'll be honest, I have had days where I just can't figure out what the factor is. I know there is one, but I can't figure out what it is, right? So in worst case scenario, I'll literally be quilting all the lines left to right, left to right, left to right. And if I don't get the quilt finished today, when I come back tomorrow, I'll try going both directions again, because sometimes, for reasons I don't understand, that makes a difference. Could be in me, probably is in me. But anyway, all that said, I'm going to go ahead and rethread now, because that's an easy thing to try again, right? See if we can kind of push a reset button there. And let's see if that will fix it. And I'm going to persist through a few different things to try stitching from right to left and see if I can get it to work smoothly. And by the way, you guys let me know. I know those of you who are faithful watchers, I know your opinion already, but you're free to be affirmative again. But those of you who are newer, is this type of conversation helpful for you? I always feel like that's the kind of thing I wanted to hear a quilter talking about in my early days. Like, is this a for real problem? Like, do machines really not ever work from right to left? Or is there a solution? Or what things do I try? So that's kind of what I'm all about, is sharing my journey. Let me know if you find this helpful. And while I say that, a thumbs up is always appreciated on these episodes, and even a share with your other quilting friends. Okay, so now the trick is to line up my needle with the exact tangent I was on before, and that's a bit tricky. If I was really wise, I would actually not have moved it out of that line there. I think we've got it. So what I'm doing is overlapping my earlier stitching by just a touch, 4 or 5 stitches probably, and also I'm going to start it on the seam allowance so that a couple of my little tiny short lock stitches catch within the layers of that seam allowance, and I feel like that's the most secure way to splice, if you will, these threads. Okay, let's give it a try. Hold your breath, guys. Let's see what Stella does. And you're right, the camera's really wobbling, Dave. And we have a broken thread. So that was not the solution. This too is part of live and unscripted shows. There have been times, this would not be the first one, where I was not able to resolve things on camera. But what I try and do then is to at least tell you, as I've done already, like what things you can try, what things I'm going to do after I get off air, but sometimes they take longer, and or they involve waiting until tomorrow and trying again. So I think we have a multitude of problems going on here. Dave,
Yeah.
We do not have the foam under the camera, and I think that's our issue for vibration. So this is us chatting behind scenes. We usually have a...
That's why I moved up. I couldn't find it, and it's on the floor because I couldn't find it before.
So do we want to reload that?
Yeah, it won't take me long.
But the thing is, yeah, I think we will. I'll let him do that, and I'll undo this last little bit of stitching. And I think for today's purposes, here's what I'm going to do. Because I promised you some tips on straight line quilting, right? On how I keep it straight and ways that I keep it flat. I think that from here, I'm going to go ahead and stitch from left to right. Now that I've talked you through a few of the things I will try, I just want to get some lines in place so that I can give you some of those other tips. So we're going to not fuss with this too terribly much. And I am going to try reloading a bobbin and putting a fresh bobbin in. I will probably try raising and lowering the hopper foot a little bit and see if that does the trick. I mentioned that this can also have to do with your thread. It can have to do with the ply of thread and just how the thread is feeding through, because sometimes when you're stitching from right to left, it's untwisting those fibers of thread. So I and other quilters have tried different things. Putting a thread net over the cone, turning the cone upside down, putting the cone on a horizontal pull instead of an upwards pull. All these things, can you see how they affect how the thread twists or untwists? So they're all little things that you can try that will sometimes just ease your machine over that hump of not wanting to stitch from right to left. But right now we're going to practice our undoing skills. And I'm sorry you can't see them well, but I can't do this with my left hand. That just does not work. Just does not. There are many things I can do left-handed. Undoing stitching is not one of them. So what Mr. Producer is doing while I talk and undo is just putting an extra layer of a thick foam under the grip of the camera where it's gripping on my handlebars to see if we can reduce that vibration. That has been an ongoing struggle, if that's the right word, since we first started filming Quilting at a Long Arm. And I think this is probably what keeps a lot of long armers from doing it, is you do have an enormous amount of machine vibration. And in order for people to see it close up, you have to affix a camera to the machine. You can't just have one freestanding in the room because it will be 10 or 12 feet away at any given moment. So, over the years, if you look back at the episodes, you've seen us try different things. We tried a GoPro at one point because they're built to handle motion, but they're not built to handle high-speed stitching needles. So each of them has their own features, each camera, each solution we've tried. I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the beginning of this line so that I can start it from the left-hand side. And also, this is an interactive show, so if you're just tuning in and if you have questions about why I'm doing this, feel free to ask them. But also, if you're just tuning in, scroll back 5 minutes. I've been talking about this process of what happens when your long arm machine does not want to quilt from right to left, and what can you do about it. And I've given you lots, kind of laundry list of things to try. There are so many factors that affect stitch formation. So when it comes to sewing right to left, or even when it comes to the tension of stitches, you know, where the top or the bottom tension doesn't look just right, it's not always a tension issue. It can often be the flow of thread, the height of the hopper foot, things like that. So the more that you can get to know your machine and its intricacies, the better chance you have of isolating the problem and therefore fixing it. So I'm doing my best to give you all the things I've learned over the years. Okay, see if we have any comments or questions that I've not addressed yet. I'm going to go ahead and start stitching a line while Mr. Producer looks. Oh, the camera's much better already. I can see it. So now I have to lock stitch at the beginning and end of each row because I don't want those lines of stitching to come out. So it does take a bit longer to do this, but it is absolutely achievable.
That's busy.
Did we have the close-up camera on when I did that? I'm so sorry, you guys. Probably all seasick now. And all these threads that end up at the beginning here, I just leave them hang off the end, and when my quilt is totally finished, I take it to my cutting table and I, comb them out like a horse's mane and just along the edge, and they all come off. Okay, do we have any questions or comments?
A lot of both.
A lot of both. Okay, if there's conversations between viewers, you don't have to bring those up.
Well, no,
We could be here for a while.
To your question. So
Okay.
let's go to your camera. Okay.
I'm going to grab my water while we chat.
You asked about if they like the question or their problems on screen.
Okay. Buttonsburg, yes, I like to see problem solving in action. So good. Love all your tips. Good. Thanks, Cindy. Conversation and sharing is why I watch you, Betsy. I appreciate that. Betsy's been watching a long time. Janice, I learn the most when you have issues. So true. Long as I'm willing to come on air and make myself a little bit visible. April, yes, yes. Good. Good. That's a few of the answers. I appreciate that. Okay, thread. I've found dust in the bobbin at times causes skipped stitches. You're absolutely right, Jennifer. Dust anywhere can be a real issue. I happen to know that this week I did a really deep cleaning on my machine, so I'm pretty confident that's not it, but sometimes it is worth a double check. Patricia, I have a sit-down Q20. It likes bobbin tension at 180. Check your TOA gauge. Try lowering your top tension a smidge. Good point, Patricia. I typically run my machine at 210, and it loves that pretty much. And this is my usual thread, top and bottom, right? And I did check my TOA gauge this morning just to be sure. Tony, check the spool on top of the machine. The thread was jumping up there. Okay, I'll try and watch that. Maybe I'll just quickly rethread it before we go too. It does jump a little. Mickey, I know you put a new needle in. However, I've done that and still need another new needle. The new needle can also be the problem. You're right, Mickey. And also, I can try a different type of needle. So I've got a top stitch needle in, for example, which has a bit longer scarf and longer eye. So next time I'll try a different type of needle, like a universal instead of a top stitch, because again, it's a little factor, but sometimes it just needs that little change in order to produce a different result. Jerry, so funny. When I use a panto at the back of the machine, I can go right to left with no issue. But when I'm in the front, my gamble has all kinds of issues with right to left. That is interesting. I don't see what the difference is there, but that is very interesting, Jerry. Mary Ellen, and you get more steps in only when stitching only from the left. You're exactly right. Roxanne, when I do straight line quilting, I have to pull my machine so hard that when it starts moving, it really takes off and goes too fast. Any tips? Do you have it locked? Like, are you forcing it out of a channel lock in order to begin it? Because mine, at least at this moment, I've got it resisting front to back, but moving absolutely freely from side to side, because that's the ideal. Marlin, will you be stitching wider spaces and then in between, or just stitch across those narrow spaces continually? When I'm doing evenly spaced lines, I prefer to work my way down the quilt. Sometimes I will do quilts where I have irregularly spaced lines, and then I will sometimes lay in one line, lay in another line, and then come back and put some in between. And we just lost our feed. I just lost my feed on my screen. Maybe it's just me. Okay, you guys, I'm going to keep quilting. My monitor at the moment is not giving me any questions or comments, so I can't answer them at the moment. I'll keep quilting, and you guys keep chatting among yourselves and giving me any questions if you have them. I've only quilted 2 lines, and I'm already to eyeballing the spacing. That's just the way I roll. You certainly could do, even if you choose evenly spaced lines, you absolutely could do them a wider spacing than I have. This is my personal taste. I like the way that this closer spacing, do we have the close camera off, by the way, because I keep moving at this dizzying pace? We're just double checking. I like to do these closely spaced lines because I think it's a little bit magical in that you sort of lose the feel of these separate strips of scrappy fabrics and they all become kind of this, I don't know, tapestry. And the closely spaced lines, I think, do that better than inch or inch and a half wide lines. That is just personal taste. A few weeks back, I was at QuiltCon in Phoenix, and the quilt that took best of show was by Verushka Zarate of Pride and Joy Quilting. And she does this fantastic foundation paper piecing. And this year, her winning quilt was a replica or inspired by a statue by Dale Lamphere. And so it's this picturesque image of a statue in fabric, and Verushka's quilting was almost identical to this. It might have been slightly closer spacing than I have here, because clearly she's found the same thing to be true. These straight lines enhance the picture without distracting from the picture. So I was quite pleased to see that. Mr. Producer is still working on why I don't have a monitor.
Been having no luck with it.
Okay, well, that being the case, Dave, if we're not having luck with that, can we have a close-up view? And I'm going to give a few tips for a line or two here of what I do to keep any ripples from forming.
Yeah, we have a close-up view.
Okay, so let me get my line closely spaced, and then I will show you. Okay, quilting straight lines like this at a long arm and at a domestic machine both have the same hazard, and that is your fabric wants to push just a little bit in front of your hopper foot. So what you'll sometimes find, especially if you're alternating directions, is that you get these tiny puckers that form because one line pushes one way and the next line pushes the other way, right? I have a solution for you, particularly at the long arm. That is, much like I was doing with the basting, I need in some way to be sure that this fabric in front of my needle is not pushing in front, but is getting pulled under a little faster than it would on its own. And the way I do that is simply by putting the weight of my fingers, just a few ounces, on what has been quilted. So if I'm going the other direction, if I was quilting back this way, I'd be putting my weight over here. Can you see how that pulls the fabric just a little in here? That's all it takes. And if you do that one thing at the long arm, you will get such beautiful flat spaces between your quilting without those funny ridges that happen when you can see a quilter was going this way, and it becomes visible, right? So that one thing, just this little bit of weight, and I will often just literally run my hand along behind where the needle is stitching. Those of you who have Berninas probably recognize that rattle that's happening off and on. I put a bobbin that was half empty in this morning, and it's letting me know already. Our Berninas rattle when the bobbin is getting empty and also when they want oil. And I did oil, but my bobbin is getting low. Are we off that close-up view again? Perfect. I do want to do enough of this to give you a decent view of what the result looks like, so I'm just going to keep progressing for a little while. And we'll talk as we go, but I don't want to stop until I have some chunk done so you can see how beautifully the quilting does kind of pull all these disparate pieces of fabric together. All quilting does that to some degree, but it always kind of surprises me on these chevrons. The sharp-eyed ones among you, I'm sure, noticed that that last line I didn't get spaced quite as accurately as I would have liked. Experience has taught me too that if there's a couple lines that are not quite perfect spacing, it will be okay. Again, personal philosophy. If you're really worried about it, pull out the ruler. What's happening though is I've got my machine, when I push forward and back, there's quite a lot of resistance, so I can override that, but it's hard to do it in tiny, tiny increments. So that's just the flip side of having that belt engaged to keep me in a straight line. It's the price I pay for it, but gosh, I love straight line quilting. I just love it. So whoever mentioned my top thread, I am watching it, and it is bouncing, but it does not look like it's bouncing beyond its normal. So I think that's okay. Mr. Producer asked me this morning why I don't do this type of quilting and let the computer drive it, because I certainly could. I could program in the spacing of my lines and let the computer drive it. I still like, one of the things that I love about free motion quilting is having ultimate control over where the seam lines end, especially if you've got thick seam allowances, or in this case where I'm trying to make my stitching exactly line up with seam lines. So I prefer to do it myself and be in charge of that. But just know that you absolutely could. If that was your bailiwick, was programming stuff like this into your digital program, whatever your machine uses, you absolutely could. I just choose to do them one at a time. Free motion quilting is my first love, and I think it will always be so. I absolutely see the advantages and the speed and the perfection of having computer-driven designs, but I still love doing it also. Okay, I'm going to give you guys another tip. I am seeing that I pulled this seam line a little too far toward me, or it seems like that to my eye. So what I'm going to do is line up my presser foot with that seam line over here on this side, and I'm going to scooch along my quilt and see how far off it is. It's a solid 1/8 of an inch off, so I'm tugging on my magnets a little bit. I'm straightening out that seam line so that my stitching pretty accurately lines up with it when I get to it. And if I do it a couple inches before I get there, it'll be a much better result than if I do it in the last 1/4 inch. I'm trying to make an 1/8 inch adjustment. Does that make sense? So again, that's the beauty of being there for every single line. You can make those little adjustments as you go. Do we want to try a different needle and see if it works? I should. Okay, hang on a second, you guys. I'm looking for a needle. Let's put in a 9014 universal and see what happens. Because if it were just that simple, it would be lovely. I'm going to keep this needle because it is brand new. those of you who don't have Berninas, one of the features that we Bernina long arm owners love is that we just use sewing machine needles in the machine. And so my stash of needles is the same at my sewing machine and my long arm. So I've put a 9014 universal in, and we'll see what happens. So this has a slightly shorter eye and shorter scarf than the top stitch needle I had in before. I'm just going to pause and have a look at my presser foot. I've already got it as low as it will go, so we'll raise it up just a touch. And I'm just doing that with this little brass knob that you see here. I don't know if you guys can see it on camera. If I turn that knob, this whole foot lifts. So that is adjustable. Once again, I'm going to get it all the way to the bottom so I know where it is, and then raise it up a little. So if I had a super thick quilt with thick seam allowances, I would be raising it quite a bit up. But for today's purposes, I don't want it to be too high. But let's see if those changes affect this issue today. Okay, here we go. I always hate doing this on camera because it's a little embarrassing to have the thread break on the regular. I'm going slowly. Do you see how I'm putting my hand on the other side as I'm making my way back in this direction? So far, so good, you guys. We made it. Okay, I'm walking back to the other end because that one seam is, I've got to decide whether that's off too much for me or if I'm going to be okay with it. I'm literally just pulling on my quilt sandwich a little bit. I literally only need it to adjust about 1/8 of an inch and then I'll be happy. Let's see how that works. There's a thread break. So it's better, but not 100%. Still, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. So my point is kind of made here that, oh, look at this. Okay, hang on a sec. How can I show this, Dave? I can't. So I'm just going to have to tell you. On the flip side of my machine, where my threading apparatus is, my thread, though it seemed to me to be bobbing correctly, has actually popped out of these top thread holders. So I think that was the issue, not actually the right to left, because when that happens, I literally cannot pull my thread through, and that's what caused it to break. Now, why is that? I'm not 100% sure. So I think I'm going to put a thread net on to see if I can fix that problem. Because this actually happened to me once yesterday too. And when things happen a couple times in succession, I kind of tend to think I need to find, a resolution. It's not just a one-time oops. So wait till you see my fancy thread net. Okay, I've threaded my needle again. And pull up my bobbin thread. And I'm going to undo my stitching, which is right here, because it shredded that last inch, and I'm going to actually undo to this seam allowance because I like to anchor my thread splice in a seam allowance. So bear with me while I back up a little. It's a bit awkward doing it under the camera like this, so again, bear with me. This orange polka dot fabric, by the way, I mentioned earlier that the last quilt that I made in this pattern had an orange backing. This was it. It's actually a linen blend fabric. And it was the backing of my last chevron quilt. So I'm going to leave a few stitches to overlap. And let me find my thread net. This here is, oh, it's got a lot of lint on it. Where are we at for the camera? This is my fancy thread net. Puma. It's a sock with the toe and the heel all cut off of it, and it's just this elasticy bit. It actually works surprisingly well, and I'm just going to put that around my spool, and all that does is put a little bit of grip on the thread as it's being pulled off the spool. Just smooths things out. That's all it's doing. Once upon a time I had a real thread net, but I don't know what I did with it. It's long since lost. So those few anchoring stitches are right in that seam allowance where there's a few folds of fabric, and then on I go into the quilting again. Well, you've gotten a day with a ton of tips today, which is kind of what happens when things run amok here and there. We've solved a few things. I'm trying to get that to adjust just a hair. There we go. There was our splice, by the way. That looks fairly nice and neat. And we're skipping again, so it's breaking. It hasn't broken yet, but it's going to. So I'm going to go back to stitching from left to right, because I don't want to keep doing this. But you've certainly gotten an up-close look at some of the factors, right, that affect how our thread is perhaps splitting or breaking. You know, other options I certainly could try would be a different type of thread. I tend to be a creature of habit. So I have my Isacord poly thread in a lot of colors. Not because I think Isacord is the only great brand out there, but because it works well for me, and so I only stock largely that one, and that's what I use and have the most of. So I don't even have this color of gray in a different type of thread other than my trilobal polyester. So, but that would certainly be an option, right? If you're looking for factors to change. And the things that we did change is I raised the hopper foot just a touch, and I put in a universal needle instead of a top stitch. And I got a couple right to left lines out of that before it broke again. Now the question is, where shall we do the splice? We're going to go back to seam allowance again. Do we have a monitor yet, Dave? Are we going to do any more questions? Do we have any questions that I want to address? Because we could do them verbally.
Wondering if the sheets are the issue with higher thread count in the sheets and the fabric on the top.
So someone is asking the question, and we're not able to, or at least I'm not able to see it on the monitor. Maybe you can throw it up, Dave. The question's being asked, is it possible that the sheet is an issue because it is a different thread count? And yes is the answer. That is possible. So I talked a little bit at length at the beginning about my feelings about using sheets, and I have very successfully, quite a few times, used a used sheet, not a high thread count one. And this falls into that category. It's not high thread count. It is a used and soft and fairly loosely woven sheet. However, I have to be honest and say it is possible. That is a factor. And truthfully, even when you have 100% quilting cotton backing, fabrics from different manufacturers still have differences. So can the backing be an issue? Yes, it can. It's definitely one of the factors. We're going to stop at the end of this row and change out bobbins because that rattle is getting really old, isn't it? Now it's stitching beautifully. Okay, let's have a look at that bobbin thread. How are we doing for time, Mr. Producer?
We've been on for an hour and a half, including our 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, our bobbin is very nearly empty. Let's put another one in. Let's put a drop of oil in. Did you notice that I can just slip right over my little end clamp to get to my oiling space? So one of the things I love about these little E-edge clamps is that they are so slim. I can slide my machine right over them if I'm careful. Drop of oil. Spin it around. I try to put a drop of oil in my machine every bobbin. At least every 2, but generally every bobbin. Back over. I just want to go back and cut those thread tails from my last splice. Okay, we're going back to our left to right lines just because I want to get this first pass done for you, and it's taking too long when I have to stop and undo so many times. Look at that, the rattle's gone, just like that. Pretty slick. Do you see how my stitching line is pretty darned accurate compared to this long seam line that they're working against here? I'm quite proud of that. That's my goal, and that's the reason for the tiny adjustments that I do. That's the beauty of having some sort of locking mechanism or belt mechanism to keep lovely straight lines, and it's the beauty of adjusting and zhuzhing your quilt as you go. So hard to make a tiny adjustment. Oh, sorry, I'm not going back that direction. Whoa. I'm so used to doing that. Mr. Producer's calling me a chicken. It's true. It's true. The truth of the matter is, it's hard to say exactly, but I do a lot of quilts where I right, left, right, left, right, left, and my machine is perfectly happy. 9 out of 10, I think I could safely say. I do quite a lot of straight line quilting. And I seldom have to do this left to rightness, but you know, it's kind of Murphy's Law. When a thing can go wrong, it will. And when a thing can go wrong when you're on air on YouTube, it definitely will. I have found that to be true. If you happen to be just tuning in, this is a quilt that is my own, and the pattern is called Scrappy Strippy Chevron. And I made this quilt because I had some overflowing scrap baskets of strips, and this is a pattern I've made a number of times to use up those strips. And so over the last few weeks, I've done the sewing portion of it in little live episodes too. So you can look those up. They're all linked in the description. It's a free pattern. There's a link for that in the description as well. Scrappy Strippy Chevron. So if you want to make one of your own, be my guest. So I did the piecing in those couple episodes. Today we're doing the quilting and talking about what's a fairly modern look of quilting is these parallel straight lines. But I mentioned too that I have used straight lines on all kinds of quilts, including quite traditional quilts, panels, surprising things when you want the quilting to play a supporting role but not to distract from whatever the piecing or fabrics are. Straight lines do a remarkable job of that. And then, as it happens, because this is a reality show, we get into the weeds of whatever problems are arising. And one of them today is my quilting machine does not particularly want to stitch well from right to left. I keep getting frayed and broken threads. And so we've talked about what are some of the factors that can affect that, because I don't think it's true that machines aren't intended to do that. I just think the factors have to be a little more precise in order for it to do that well. The timing, the needle hook assembly. So then we talked about different things that you can tweak. So it might be a fresh needle, might be a different type of needle. I had a top stitch in when we began, and I have since changed to a universal. So that's a different sharpness in the needle and a different length of the eye. So those things can affect the flow of thread, the formation of the stitch. Other factors that come into play today would be the fact that I'm using a sheet as a backing. Like I said, I have done that before, many times before with good success, so I don't think that's the factor, but I can't absolutely rule it out because it is something that is different from some other quilts that I do. And also we've talked about the fact that even variations between manufacturers of 100% cotton fabric that have nothing to do with sheets, you can still have stitch formation differences. Think batiks, for example, or minkies, which are not a cotton fabric. But so there's all kinds of factors, is my point, that come into play. And the best way to deal with it is to try and tweak those factors one at a time and see if you can figure out how to get past it, get your machine happily stitching right to left. And my last ditch solution to any problem at my machine is always go away and come back tomorrow. Sometimes things just go differently when you approach them with a fresh eye. I'm always appreciative if you are enjoying this episode. If you like my style of live and unscripted quilting, I would love if you give it a thumbs up and a follow. And if you click the notification bell, you will be notified by YouTube whenever I'm going live again. And also, I try to give advance notice in my newsletters of what the upcoming live projects are a day or two in advance. And the times and even days change from time to time, so I like to give you advance warning of that. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, just head over to my website, StitchedBySusan.com. You'll get a little pop-up that will invite you to provide your email address and first name. And then you'll get my newsletters. I started so far away there from my point. Whoops. My thread doesn't seem quite right. Hang on a second. Just popped out of one of the carriers. There we go. My best tip for when you're doing straight line quilting like this, at a long arm specifically, is this idea of resting your hand behind the needle that's stitching. This prevents any fabric from pushing out in front and causing what you often see in straight line quilting is you can see that the quilter has gone one direction and then gone the reverse direction because you'll get these pull lines, right? And this idea of just resting a few ounces of weight on your fingers behind the needle totally resolves that problem. And if I was going back the other direction with every other line, I would simply reverse the side that my hand is on, so it's always following the needle. Just a few more lines, and then we're going to kind of step back and look at this and look at kind of the magic that happens when you lay in quilting, and what was a scrappy kind of cobbled together looking quilt top is now becoming a cohesive quilt. That is always so magical to me. And there'll be time for you to ask more questions, and then at that point I think we'll call it for today. I will definitely post pictures on social media of this quilt finished. I usually replace the YouTube thumbnail with a finished one too, but it's generally not the whole quilt, it's a close-up. But I'll post some pictures on social media of the whole thing finished so that you get to see it. And I'll try to do that within a couple of days. As soon as I get it all quilted and have some good lighting to grab a picture with. I want to mention too, the pattern for this is free, Scrappy Strippy Chevron quilt. There's a link in the description. But the thing I wanted to mention is I am offering free quilting for one person who makes this pattern. So you do have to get the pattern from me, and then you have to provide a picture showing some level of sewing progress. So it can't just be your scraps assembled and a background fabric. I want to see that you're actually doing it. You've actually got some chevrons coming together. Send a picture of that before the 31st of March. I probably should say before the 29th of March to support@StitchedBySusan.com. And we will draw one winner. Now my assistant Erin kind of set this up, and she put some stipulations in there, which I now can't remember off the top of my head, but essentially they are, I'm not offering to do a California King for free. There is some limitation as to size, but certainly a quilt that is the size of my pattern. Absolutely. Okay, funny story. I did not get my loop pulled up properly at the other end, and my bobbin thread, yep, still attached all the way across. So now I'm at the other end of my quilt snipping that, trying to snip that. And now I'm back at this end, grabbing that long tail because I do not want to stitch that in. Trying to grab that long tail. There we go. Two or three more lines. So get your questions in or your comments. I know some of you are on here that have experience with long arm quilting. If you have other thoughts about other things that I could be trying, I'm all ears. This is a great place to chat about the things that we have learned, what we've tried on our machines. Machines do vary, and they do honestly seem to have their preferences, it feels like sometimes. I don't think that can really be true because they're mechanical, but for whatever reason, the type of thread that we are prone to using or something like that, our machines can tend to have preferences and favorites. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've found any great tips. And if you're just tuning in and heard about the free quilting option, know that there is absolutely still time. You can still download the pattern get to work this weekend, get a quilt started. Again, I'm so pleased at how parallel my stitching line is to the long seam line that I'm going near to here. And before I put the quilt top on, I showed too, for those of you that were here then, I showed the back of it. And all the seams that are, oh, let me just move this a sec so I can show you. All the seams that are within the quilt, I pressed to one side toward the gray. Yeah. All the seams that are within the quilt went toward the gray, or within the blocks. But then when I did the long vertical seams that went all the way along, that one I pressed open, so that at these corners where there is some thickness, that keeps that thickness to a minimum. So I can quilt these parallel lines fairly close to it, and it lays beautifully flat. Okay, I'm going to do one more line on the other side of that long vertical seam, and then we're going to chat and probably call it a day for today. Mr. Producer and I are having a party tonight. I've probably mentioned before, we love playing pinochle, and we have quite a few friends that do as well. So we're actually hosting pinochle for a crowd this evening with a potluck dinner and good card game. No matter where you are in the U.S., you'll probably hear our laughing. We always have a good time together. Do you know what I'm going to do, you guys? This is what I'm going to do for you. I feel like I haven't gotten a lot of quilting done or showed you as many tips as I had hoped to, but I know a way that I can sneak some more in. And that is to go ahead and advance my quilt right now, because this does require a bit of trickiness. Which camera am I on, Dave? The side one?
Yeah,
because I can't see my monitor now, you guys, so I don't see what you're seeing, which I usually do. Yeah. Because it is a little bit tricky with these parallel lines. The closer together they are, the more important it is to make them perfect, right? When they're an inch or an inch and a half apart, you don't see an 1/8 inch of difference, but when they're tiny, you do. So let's talk about that a little bit. First off, let's look at this portion that is quilted. I don't know how much it shows on camera, but when I look at the portion that's not quilted, I definitely see all the separate pieces of fabric. When I look at the area that has been quilted with these parallel lines, it just seems to blend so much. And that to me is the magic of quilting. It stops being this patchwork looking thing and becomes this whole unit that I just love. Okay, that said, to advance this with straight lines, one of the things that I do is detach my quilting machine. So if you've watched me doing other episodes, you'll see that often I'll stop at the end with needle down and I'll just roll the quilt and my machine just rolls up with it, which I can do for most patterns. But I don't do that when I'm doing straight parallel lines because it does pull a little bit on the fabric, and that can matter. So I detach the machine so that it's not pulling on it at all. And then I'm going to undo all of our holding apparatuses. So the magnets, which are on the front, the clips, which are on the side. This is pretty typical. And I'm actually going to take a minute to cut some of these threads because they're so long and I don't want them to catch anywhere in my wheels or rolling. So I'm just going to cut a handful of those threads off. Like so. Undo the other end. So far, very much like our ordinary advancing. I tend to do a slightly shorter advance. It means I have to do it oftener, but it's easier to get things straight when they're closer to me. I have a 24-inch machine, so it's almost arm's length if I go, a full advance. So I'm going to do about 2/3 of what I would typically do. And again, I'm still doing my very usual things, which is tug my quilt and my batting a little bit, make sure it's all smooth and flat. Here's where the key comes in. I've still got in my case, my belt locked. In your case, it might be your mechanical lock or a clamp on your wheel, but whatever's holding my machine resisting forward and back, that is affixed. Now I'm going to find me a straight line. It's going to be this one. And I'm going to line up my presser foot with it, my hopper foot, and then I'm going to roll along the quilt, adjusting as needed to make that seam line be straight with that hopper foot. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm using that established straight line and I'm adjusting my quilt ever so little. It's about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm having to pull on it quite hard. So I'm actually going to go back to the beginning and push that up a little. Because I feel like maybe that end was just hanging down a bit. So let's adjust the foot again now that I've moved that. And so once again, we'll roll along this seam allowance. And this is why I need to be able to see it, right? It doesn't work if it's way out here. Roll along that seam line, doing a little tug toward me or a little push back from me as needed to get it nice and straight. Not surprisingly, the ends of the quilt are wanting to stretch out just a little bit. So I'm just encouraging them to go up a little. And now I'm going to lay in my basting stitches at both ends, trying to not shift this as I do it, right? So there is a little bit of fullness there. I'm encouraging it under the needle because I don't want to pull it down. I want to get it up in there under the needle. So I'm going to baste at both ends. I'm going to put my side clamps on. I'm going to put my front magnets on, all while maintaining, not adjusting the quilt anymore. I've got it straight. I don't want to fiddle with it. I don't even want to brush up against it or lean over the rail. And I can see right here, there's little bits of full, like it just wants to stretch where all those seams are on the end. I can even gauge this line down here, which I couldn't reach my hopper foot to, but I can gauge it to the rail, right? And that's just another guideline for keeping the whole thing without shifting out of place. I said early on, because this quilt has so many bias edges, even if it was perfectly square and flat when you sewed it, it's possible to stretch it out of shape. Equally, if it wasn't square and flat, it's possible to coax it into squareness and flatness. Doing it in increments is the key. Doing this with each and every pass of the quilt, not waiting till you're at the bottom end, but every time you advance, checking for that straightness of the seam lines. That's the key. Our basting is in place. Okay, we're just about ready. Let me just get this other side clamp in.
If you can see this, I'll throw them up here.
And you guys can't see it on camera, but I'm kind of watching this. I've got a sheet on the back, right? And I showed you early on, if you missed this part, you can go back and find it. I sewed extenders of ugly fabric on both ends because I just barely had enough backing as wide as the quilt. So I'm kind of feeling under there. I can feel where that seam allowance is, and I'm making sure that my quilt is staying within that. It's like within 1/4 of an inch, so it's a near thing. So I chose to accept that difficulty in order to be able to use that sheet. I'm putting my clamps on, or my magnets, and I'm carefully not adjusting them. Sometimes I will, like on other quilts, but this time, because I know I've got that straight line so carefully adjusted into place, I don't want to shift anything if I can possibly help it. There we go. And even if I look at my leveler bar on the back like that, the quilted line next to it is beautifully straight. So that just comes with being really cautious as you're rolling and not putting any stretch or tension on those ends. Okay. I can't see it up there, Dave, remember? You have to...
I know, I just went in that camera.
Oh, I see. This camera. That's what he's telling me. You're going to tell me the questions, yeah? Oh, I can read them. Jean, I need to feel comfortable when problems happen, and you've helped with that. You're so patient and informative. Thank you. You're welcome, Jean. I mean, truly, that's my goal. That's my goal. To show you guys the reality of my quilting and to help answer questions that maybe seem like it works so perfectly for other people. And today is Case in point, it's not always perfect, right? But we still get it done and it's still beautiful. Abby, for some reason, the quilting lines are so close together. Is there more about this later on, you said, Dave?
What the distance is between them, I think.
Okay. My distance between them, Abby, is a little shy of 1/2 inch. That's just my personal preference for spacing on quilted lines. I like that look. It smooths out, you know, you don't see the seam lines between the fabric as much. When they're wider spaced, you still see that patchworky look more, but that is just personal preference. Diane, Susan, are you using manual mode or one of the BSR modes? I have BSR 2 on at the moment, Diane, so that when I stop moving, the machine stops stitching. So when I come to those ends, I'm not still getting that coasting stitch while I'm trying to adjust forward or back. Bernina owners will know exactly what we're talking about. Betsy, if you were not as fabulous a piecer as you could doing the quilting lines in the same direction as the seam lines become problematic, i.e. the seam line and stitching line are not parallel. It's a good question, Betsy. So you're kind of thinking through, if you didn't have long straight seam lines, if they were a bit more irregular, could this be harder to do those parallel lines? Yes, it could. And in that case, you might choose to do the lines horizontally. So I'm quilting horizontally here, but that's because I've got my quilt turned on end, right? My finished quilt, the lines are going to be top to bottom. So you might choose in your finished quilt to have the lines from side to side. Absolutely an option. This was just my preference for this time. Linda, Bernina Q20 sit down is still shredding glide 40 weight thread. I've tried these needles, and she lists them. Help. Oh gosh, Linda. If it was me, I would literally try a different thread. I would try either a different weight, like 60 weight or 50, or I would try a different brand because there are subtle differences between the brands. I definitely have had some brands work better for me than others. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a better thread brand. It just means for whatever factors are present in your quilting, it might even be the manufacturer of cotton fabric that you love the best, right? That thread suits your machine and your quilting. So that's where I would go. I would literally try a different thread. Borrow a spool from a friend. Try preloaded bobbins. Like just try other factors that you can change other than just the needles and see if you can't figure that out. Nancy, Rainy Canada, I know it's frustrating for you to have issues on camera, but I learned so much from you when you show this kind of struggles. I appreciate that, Nancy, and so many of you have said that over the years. That's why I keep doing it, because it's not about me teaching you from the wealth of my experience so much as being a bit vulnerable and honest. Like I have experienced quite a few things, but being willing to share even more of those experiences with you, because you're right. This is how we learn. Okay, two-part question coming up. Denise, have you ever used the credit card method with the machine stopped, needle and presser foot down, slide a credit card between the quilt top and lowered presser foot? When it slides in, without dragging and not too loose, you have the sweet spot. I have, Denise, and I think I've gotten to the point of doing it enough times that I can judge that by where it's sitting on the fabric. I still find that sometimes I have to adjust it. Just the other day, I was working on a different quilt than this one, and I was getting skipped stitches even though I wasn't quilting straight lines. And I found that I actually needed to lower that presser foot a lot, like as far down as it would go. Now today, I'm finding it's working a little better with it up a tiny bit. So it doesn't seem like it's always identical. And again, I'm sure it's the difference like in the fabrics. My gray background fabric today is a linen blend, which is a little more bulky than some other fabrics. So again, it's just all those factors that come into play. But thank you for the suggestion, because I'll probably play around with that a little bit more. Stella is camera shy today. Apparently, Mickey, something like that. I don't know. It's always something. Betsy, if it were the backing, would it not cause a problem stitching in both directions? I kind of feel that way too, Betsy. And as I mentioned earlier, I've used these types of sheets quite a few times with good success. So I don't think it is the backing. I just don't like to be so emphatic. Oh, it's never that, or it's always that. It's a possibility. Abby, I always say that when the machine doesn't want to work, it's best to turn off the engine and tell it to rest. See you tomorrow. I agree. I have no reason behind that. I just know it has been true for me. Sometimes if I just stop and go and take a break and come back for another session later, usually tomorrow, it goes better. So always worth a try when you're frustrated. I've loved this episode. Thanks for hanging in what must be a really stressful situation, but it was so helpful for your viewers. I've gotten over it being stressful. There was a day when this would put me in tears after the show. I've gotten over that. I'm happy that you're here and that you stick around to see these very real problems in my reality show. Nancy, how are you measuring the distance between rows? I'm simply eyeballing it, Nancy. In the past, I've started with a ruler and done my first few lines that way to kind of get that pacing in place. I've done this particular spacing so many times, I'm eyeballing it. I did load the ruler foot on my machine, which is a bit bulkier and thicker and helps me to very visibly see like an exact 1/4 inch, right? So that ruler foot helps me gauge that distance with my eye, but I'm literally just eyeballing it. A few more. Jean, what batting are you using? Jean, it's 100% bamboo from Windline, and it is their heavier, their 6 ounce. I love, love, love the softness and drape of it. It's my personal choice, and this is my quilt. Marlon, would stitching all around the outside of the flimsy before basting or loading on your long arm help with stretching? I can kind of see where you're going with that. I don't see that being true. It would be very hard to work with if it was pre-basted around the entire perimeter at your long arm. That's kind of the point of having a long arm, is that you do it on this big frame as opposed to having to flatten out your layers and smooth them out and get them stitched in place beforehand, if that makes sense. Quilters other than I might use a basting method whereby they advance and baste, advance and baste, advance and baste all of the quilt before they go back and lay the quilting in. That's absolutely an option. But I do not think I would recommend basting the layers before you load them on the long arm. I think you would struggle getting them back into evenness.
Just one more comment, if I can find it, right there. End on that one.
Another Susan, thanks for trying to answer all our questions. You are so welcome. That's what I'm here for. And honestly, it's a pleasure for me too to get to be able to spend some of my sewing time with all of you. So thanks so much for joining me. If you've enjoyed this episode, I really do appreciate a thumbs up. Click on the bell for notifications and share this episode with your quilting friends. That really helps us to get more visible. So from Mr. Producer and I to you, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on another episode of Live and Unscripted.